Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Association podcast, Beyond Binary. My name is Peggy Sai. I'm one of the board members of the association and also Chief Data Officer at Big ID. And part of my Beyond Binary podcast is to interview AI book authors. So tonight, I am pleased to have a good friend of mine, Cortnie Abercrombie. She's the author of What You Don't Know: AI's Unseen Influence on Your Life and How to Take Back Control. Welcome, Cortnie.
Hey, Peggy, thanks for having me, and thanks for the great discussions that we've had about AI ethics.
I know. So, Cortnie, I've known you for a few years now, and you're also the CEO of AI Truth. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
And I know you have a background in strategy and marketing, and also just being around data, chief data officers, and AI. So, can you talk a little bit more about your background and how you came about to what made you interested in writing this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I did, well, I did a few things at IBM that I think people would remember me for, which is one of the ways that I even know you, Peggy, is from my Chief Data and Analytics Officer community building days. So one of the things that I did while at IBM was build one of the largest communities of chief data and analytics officers, and then just
Right.
keep them connected, help them build their career project, profiles, and really bring more of them into more Fortune 500 companies at the time. And then I kind of wanted to stretch myself and challenge myself. We talk about women having goals and what should we always be looking for. And one of the things that I really wanted to get involved with was artificial intelligence. And so a friend of mine was leading a group in a different part of the organization, and they were just starting up their AI practice. And I thought, wow, this is a great time to move into that group and really start looking at how different of the Fortune 500 were going to incubate different AI solutions. And this was as far back as 2015. So
2015.
AI was just really kind of taking hold and taking root inside of various Fortune 500 companies. And it was just a really great time. I mean, the business use cases were just, I think we logged over 150 right then at the very first of when I was coming in. And now I'm sure there's just beyond, I can't even imagine how much more they must have logged by now, but it was across all industries, and it was just so much fun. And my job was to go and meet with the data scientists on the ground at the at the companies that we were going to, but also with our data scientists at IBM and some of the IBM researchers, and really look at, like, what are these ones that maybe we want to do a joint venture with some of our customers to create these amazing solutions for the industry as a whole, for each industry that we were going into. But as part of that, as part of looking at those solutions, I had to go in and really evaluate the operations of how these things were getting set up. What were the data scientists doing? Where were they getting their data? How were they creating the algorithms? What algorithms were they using? How are they training the models? And how are they finally doing the implementation for the organization as a whole? And I just kept seeing over and over these fast and loose practices, and not just fast and loose practices, but I mean, literally ones that just left a ton of technical debt. And even to the point where, you'd see like these kind of like rock star data scientists at each client, and they'd come in and they'd make a big buzz and they'd do a big, huge project, and only they knew how they put all the things that they put together. I mean, and they were munging data 6 ways to Sunday, and they're doing all these things. And then they would leave to go to the next big thing without having documented so many things. And so, even one chief marketing officer that we had worked with had been left with a $1 million algorithm that then couldn't be used because they had no idea what went into it, how to keep it going. If things, they couldn't couldn't, it wasn't defensible, I guess is what I was going to say. So then they ultimately just had to kind of recreate, but they wanted to do it properly and, with proper documentation and all that good stuff. And I thought, okay, that's just one incident. But then, in my book, I talk about, in the very beginning of the book and in the intro, I talk about this impetus that I had, this moment in time where I was like, okay, I think we're taking and we're doing things with data that maybe that the customer wants to do, that I was like,
That's a
and
Cortnie, that's a great story because that is chapter 1 in your book. And I thought that was one of the most realistic experience that you had visiting a client site, and it was a tobacco company.
yeah.
And for me, that really shined the light on what is the ethics around some of the responsibility usage of some of these AI projects. What is right? And ultimately, I think I loved the thought process that you had. But Corny, I mean, was there more that you could share that wasn't written in the book in terms of, the internal struggle you faced with in terms of helping a company with AI solution, but also the ethical boundaries that you faced?
I mean, and that's the thing. You don't know until you're in, if you're not thinking about the ethics of these solutions, and because you just think we tend to, yeah, I'll expand upon that, because that was my moment where I had this crisis where we have this cognitive dissonance. If you're familiar with cognitive dissonance, it's where you're, on one hand, hey, I need to make a living. I want to be a star at my job. I want to progress and be, superstar, person at my job. But on the other hand, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Am I going to help someone advertise tobacco to potentially children? Which is where that kind of was heading, in my opinion, from all the writing I kept seeing on the wall and the choice of the social media outlets being chosen. I was like, I just didn't feel like I could. That was, for me, a moment I had to go and think about, where are my boundaries? Where does this one, value of being, an earner and being ambitious in my job versus, doing something that is directly against my core set of values in myself personally? How do I deal with, those two? It's a cognitive dissonance. You have to figure it out. Where is my boundary? Where do I cut and say, that's it? I can't do this anymore. And I felt like that was fine. I think that was the final thing for me that really, I had to back away and say, I think a lot more professionals who participate in the AI world need to think about how they participate in the AI world, and if they're, how far they're willing to go when it comes to just like beg, borrowing, stealing data, targeting, vulnerable groups of people, with some things that are questionable. At what point will things maybe shift, and maybe the user, that maybe what you thought you were doing, because I talk about how we thought we were solving cancer problems, right? I mean, we thought we were literally helping. Half the group wanted to proceed because we thought we were trying to help heavy smokers get onto what was essentially a less risky product, and that kind of thing. But instead, though, the shift started happening where it was like, well, now we're going to be aiming at, potentially younger 13 to
Targeting a
14
different
year
user.
old.
So I mean, that's, I think, the biggest challenge, and certainly, with the usage of data today, it's really hard for teams to know. They think they're solving a business problem, but you, as a consultant, you come in and you see the bigger implications, certainly, of how that data is going to be used, and what the ultimate goal of the algorithm was not the original purpose. So I think
Yes.
still happening today, I'm sure, in many organizations. But moving beyond the ethics, in your book, you certainly talk a lot about trusting AI. And it's literally in your title, The Unseen Influence on Our Lives. And I'm sure we'll talk about all aspects of our lives where AI is taking control. But when you wrote this book and it was published, I felt like you wrote it not too long ago, but you did write it before the hype, right, of open AI and generative
Yes,
AI. But I
absolutely.
think the fundamentals certainly is still the case. Like, how do we trust the large language models, the generative AI, but how do we trust AI in general? So what is your framework when you look at the trustworthiness of AI?
And it's still the same. Even when I look at news articles today, when I see something has happened and a self-driving car has run into another vehicle and they're trying to figure out what happened, I think about these exact same frameworks. And when I think about Gen AI and how it's hallucinating, I go back to this same exact framework. And the thing I want everybody to think about, whether it's generative AI or regular AI or automated AI or whatever you think whatever your use case is, I want you to always be thinking about the data, the algorithms, the training of these things, and the implementation of these things. And so the questions that we should be asking in that order, so going back to data, where does the data come from? I mean, in the case of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, this was a professor who literally went out. He was a psychology major. Or a psychology professor who went out and basically tricked people. He was doing happiness studies, but he basically labeled them people as being persuadable or not persuadable, and then turned that over to a campaign who then did, it was the Trump campaign, and they went out and did I believe the Crooked Hillary campaign based on that to the persuadables, who were labeled the persuadables. But the thing is where did he get that information? He was targeting people with a psychological study that is out of context for use for what most people who would have been targeted would have wanted that to be used for. And we do that with all kinds of things today. There's scraped data for hiring algorithms. They're scraping it from social media profiles. And we see that there have been cases now where people are getting in trouble using different social media, profiles and things out of context. There's actual legal cases. So we have to really evaluate, where is this data coming from? Do we have permission to use it even? Because if we're fooling people into giving us their information, say we're saying it's a happiness quiz, and then we're going off and using it to literally exploit them with it, is that a fair use of this data? Also, the other thing is quality. I mean, sometimes data is just crappy and you shouldn't be using it. You need to really thoroughly investigate the data that you've got in front of you. Sometimes you don't mean to cause overfitting, but at the end of the day, if you can't get enough good data and sound data proxies, so sometimes the thing that you're looking for, you're not going to have data for. I mean, well, a lot of times the things that you're trying to accomplish with data, there's not data to support it. And so a lot of
that's why companies put in synthetic data, right, to try to mimic
yeah,
real world. But I always, think about whether or not that's still fully representative of all demographics and
that's right.
population
That's
as well.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And especially of the stakeholders that it's going to be used on. So you
Mhm.
really have to think about, once you're at the data stage trying to design the data to go into this, but then on the back end, you're having to already think way far ahead about how is this going to be used in the context in the real world? Like who might actually be using this? Is it someone that I haven't trained this data to serve? And we see that a lot with fit for use, right? Fit for purpose.
Mhm.
That we keep coming back to the good old fit for purpose. Is it fit for purpose for this particular group? If it's been trained on all white skin and it's something that involves darker skin tones, maybe
Mhm.
you shouldn't, you should go back to square one and redesign the data around that.
And
So
Courtney, also something that we talked about in the past is also a lot of the medical research studies as well, then targeted to traditionally one gender, but I think as women, we've been less represented in a lot of the studies as well. So those can't always generalize is what
yeah.
and really knowing the training data set that's used in the original algorithm is really key. So I
It
think the
really
second piece is algorithms, right? How they've been trained, who the data scientists are that made these assumptions. So Cortnie, I know you have a lot of
Mhm.
thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, and not only that, but I mean, because we all come with our own implicit biases where we don't even know we're biased. And one of the best examples I think of is a while back, there was a public article about how Starbucks was gonna do away with cash and just go to digital payments because they were easier to get data, right? You can get more data when you have digital payments versus when someone's paying in cash because you can't track people as easily and you can't understand their behavior. And I think we're, as data people, we're always looking for more data, right? But when you cut off an avenue, there's like 40 million people, at least 40 million people in the United States that don't have actual scoring. They don't have credit. They don't have scoring based on, because they've never used credit cards. And it's everything from a cultural thing to just, socioeconomic standing, but you're literally decreasing someone's ability to interact with your company based on something as dumb as, limiting off cash at that point, which is an implicit bias because those people assumed, because they use credit cards every day and their friends use credit cards every day and everybody around them use credit cards every day, they assumed that would be okay. And they didn't even think about that, there's all this huge group of people that they would be excluding by doing that. So I think that part of you have to reach out and really understand, again, in context, how is your how's your AI product going to be used, and is it feasible to actually cut out an entire section of people by limiting things like that? And then the best way to protect against that is to just always incorporate as much as humanly possible feedback. So create feedback loops for your algorithms to go out and actively ask, is this right? Think about remember the old Spotify thumbs up, thumbs
Yeah,
down?
giving the feedback live. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's as easy as that. Sometimes you need to do that on pieces of data. Hey, is this still correct about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Is this zip code correct? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Things like that. Are you, is your status as like I still get baby formula. My child is 18 years old. Why am I getting baby formula ever? Like, so, you got to update and you got to keep things governed. And the model training, that's the other part of this too, is really paying attention to how these models are trained and what's the best test bed areas to include that are like similar conditions for which the AI will be used. Because a lot of people forget to include the contextual aspects in their training of their models, which is kind of crazy. And when you think about it. And then finally, like implementation, does the data and the algorithms and the training all do what it's supposed to do for the user in the user's environment? And does the user need to, does the user need to train themselves in order to be able to use this product correctly? Like, look at all the doctors and people who don't use AI because they haven't even been trained on it. So they don't trust it, and they haven't put any they don't have a policy mandating training of any of this. And like a lot of startups, they don't put out any kind of guidance about how different groups should be trained on their product. So you have to really you have to pay attention as someone who's buying these solutions. Like, do you come with, ask the people, like ask the vendors that you're using, like, are you going to train our people on this? Tell us what is not an acceptable use of this, because a lot of people, they get something and they say, oh, this is so great, we could probably use it for this too, which is not fit for purpose in a lot of cases because of the way that AI has been trained. So there's a lot of questions and communication that has to happen on the back end with the implementation itself, with training and communicating what these things are for, how they work, and all of that good stuff for the users even.
So, Cortnie, I mean, you've explained it really well from a consumer point of view, how we should be more aware of algorithms that we use day to day. But there's many of us in the audience that, they are data management practitioners, right? That's the audience that listen to this podcast, or they do data, but they're in the organization, they're not in the cool AI group, right? So
Yeah.
let's talk about what we should be, how we should be helping people whose role is not directly linked to the AI technologies, but they have a data function. What should they be doing and saying, and to help advocate and improve the company's ethical and trustworthiness use of data?
Yeah, and I think there's several ways that data folks can get involved when they don't necessarily know about what the data science teams are up to, or because let's just face it, it has a lot how disconnected data people become, like internal data people become from these data science AI projects. It's often related to the use of vendors at within a line of business. So let's say a marketing officer or a digital officer decides to do a new innovative project. They say, I'm just going to go out and get a vendor to do this. And then the vendor just doesn't really understand any of the data practices inside the company. And they just start, doing whatever data beg, borrowing, stealing they need to do. And unfortunately, that completely cuts out the people who actually know how the data works and are experts in the data and the sourcing of data within the company. And the best thing I can offer in terms of being a data person who should be able to insert themselves into AI conversations is start looking at some of the strategic things in the company that the company has stated publicly that they're trying to do, especially if you're in a big, huge company where it's like a Fortune 500 and you're not as you're not like 2 layers below the CEO, you're just like 50,000 layers removed or whatever, and you're trying to figure out how to insert yourself with more of the AI projects. I mean, so essentially, if that is your case that you are dealing with today, I would say really pay attention to what the company is strategically trying to do. Understand which departments that will involve within your company, and if it's like the digital office or the chief marketing officer or whatever office is going to start taking that on. Then you need to go and immediately start trying to have a conversation with some of their data science folks and say, hey, we have a whole sound practice around our data and our analytics. We can offer you data that meets a lot of the conditions of this strategy. So why don't you come sit with us and let's show you what we've got, and you involve us in this process so that we don't end up with a lot of technical debt that ends up going nowhere, or people don't end up understanding this. And then that way you will have preempted the conversations. That way when your chief marketing officer or whoever goes out and they want to start trying to do things with vendors outside the company or whatever the case may be, they'll know you exist. And specifically you can raise your hand and say, hey, I think, if we're in a center of excellence for data at my company, for example, I want to raise my hand to go work with this group over here that's working on AI so I can help them doing this in the right way with our data policies in mind. And I can't think of anyone who would say no.
Mm-hmm. No,
to that.
I agree with that approach as well. I mean, I did something similar before GDPR. I mean, certainly what I was, the financial service company I worked with was not aware of what the potential impacts were and what we had to do to comply and to document our data and to do privacy impact assessments. So certainly being one, as you said, knowledgeable about the upcoming changes that's in the industry or new regulatory changes, and also how to align that with the company business strategy and making yourself the expert, but also the collaborator, reach across the teams as well is so important.
Yeah, because I mean, the data scientists, honestly, their biggest pain point, even the ones that are coming as vendors to your company and working with you, their biggest pain point is it still takes the longest to clean up the data. So if you're coming and offering clean data, clean quality data sources for them that are free, also, by the way, to them at least, I mean, you've been cleaning them up and you've been doing the hard work. there's no way they're going to say no to that. So, I mean, that's what you're bringing to the table. Know that that's valuable. Know it's valuable, and they should include you in the conversations as part of that, with that angle.
Absolutely. And I think it goes into some of the things that I see organizations do today is build a AI governance practice. I mean,
Yeah.
traditionally organizations have a data governance practice, which is fully documented and well aware of. Organizations are trying to modify that to be an AI governance. So I don't know, Courtney, if you have any thoughts on what additional steps or processes are needed to differentiate between a data governance and an AI governance framework.
Well, I mean, AI, the process for data governance is, it's so extensive to the point sometimes that it's almost like too much. I mean, but the process for AI governance is usually related to a specific business case, right? There a specific use case. And there's even some use cases that are related to data and data modeling and data cleanup and all kinds of good stuff like that. So I would say, they're sort of different, but the whole of AI, the end output is completely and utterly dependent on the data that went into it. And so if you have bad data going into it or bad data practices, it's just
Mhm.
going to snowball in terms of it's going to overfit and do bad things and be bad for people. So, and it's just going to get worse the more that time goes by and the more data that goes into it. If you don't get the kernel of that right, if you don't get the ground truth versions of the data correct. So, I mean, there is every incentive not to create a new technical debt with a new AI project. Do it right from the beginning with the good data and the good data practices.
And hopefully organizations are learning that to not create more technical bit debt. But just going back to the title of your book, certainly taking back control. And I love the cover of your book because it's the camera of everyone's laptop and a tape, a masking tape that's covering it. And what you're implying is that, unknowingly we are giving away our private information, our biometric. Every time we walk through an airport, our pictures is always being taken. And I know that every time I board a plane, the security checks, they take a picture and they say they're deleting my picture right away. But I know that's what they say. But they're keeping my picture of and my profile every time I go through the airport. So what do we not know, Courtney, about how do we take back control of all the data that I know I'm not willingly giving up, but how do I take back control?
Well, there's a lot that you can do, and one is knowing all of the different places where your data is actually collected and then bartered out or sold out. And I have a long list of those in the book, and it's in the chapter about what do they know about you.
Mhm.
And then on that front, you can ask to have your information deleted. Not everybody complies, but there are quite a few, especially if they're at a big brokerage group, that will comply with that. But the other thing too is just limit how much you're on a lot of different social media. Maybe instead of using your actual face, take a side view, or you can use an avatar. There's lots of things you can do to limit how much biometric information you give. Of course, Peggy, you and I are trying to be, influencers in our space. So we have
These
our
are real
face
things.
plastered everywhere. But I mean, but if you're not trying to do that, the best thing that you can possibly do is, put an avatar of yourself and your kids out there instead of, even Zuckerberg put a smiley face over his kids' faces in the photos that he put out of them, on his social media. That should tell you something about how much your face gets used. But not only that, but limit how much information you're actually exposing to people. When you take a picture, take the metadata off of the photo before you post it, so people don't know exactly where you were down to the dropped pin on the Google Maps, like maybe don't share so much information. And try to limit, how many different apps you sign up for, because as we know, it's the third party access to apps that can often be the biggest exposure when it comes to your private information. So, and the other thing is, now there's some new tools, like Apple has a hide my email, so that you can actually do away with some of those identifiers of yourself. But just be careful what identifiers of yourself you put in when you sign up for some new service or some new app, and make sure that you try to lock that down as much as you possibly can. It's hard if you're trying to be out there, making a brand and a name for yourself. But
That's certainly true. But I know certainly a lot of the in the US we don't have a federal privacy law yet, but certainly in certain states like California, you are allowed to request the categories, and some states allow you to request a list of companies, of third parties that requesting your profile. So certainly that's another way to advocate for, just what information is out there. Knowing your rights, I think, is a key thing, and taking back control is something I think that. Certainly GDPR set a precedence for that, but I think that even outside of these regulations, there's just so much technology that envelopes all of us as well.
yeah.
So I know, Cortnie, we are towards the end of our podcast, so I want to ask you one more question, which is, what has happened either in the last 6 months with all the new changes and advancements in the generative AI? If you were to write a part 2 to your book, what topics would you focus on?
That's really tough. Because generative AI is changing by the minute. I remember this time last year, I was actually starting a generative AI project with high schoolers. And we were doing all kinds of things with it. And then all of a sudden the policy changed, and we had been reaching out to the OpenAI people, because at that time there was only like 10. And we were asking them all kinds of questions, and they said, wait. Oh, so you're working with high school students under the age of 18. And then the next thing we knew, they put out a policy about it, right? So they said, no, we don't cover any kids working with this. So it was like, oh my God. But I will generally say, if you are putting in any kind of confidential information, you need to stop right now. Don't ever, never put into any API'd version of ChatGPT unless you have it locked down, and you're using your own version of an LLM that maybe you're creating, and you're keeping the data on the back end. Within, maybe you're using some RAG methods and so forth. But I mean, do not put confidential information into these things. It's just not worth it right now. We just don't know. It's evolving by the second, and the policies are evolving by the second. So if I had to rewrite this around generative AI, I would have fun with it first. And I'd say, yeah, there's a lot of great use cases and it's awesome. But I'd say be really careful unless you're going to develop your own versions of these things internally based on your internal closed documents and closed data, because they are, somewhat prone to hallucination. You are going to have to oversee them quite a bit, and you can't be lazy with them. You just can't. I mean, we want to be lazy because that's the purpose of them. It's, hey, write me an email. But then you realize, oh my God, it just said bad things, and I just put that email out instantaneously because I wanted to automate the delivery of it, right? So I could be timely. Because our goals, once again, cognitive dissonance. One side, I want to be fast and delivering content that people care about, right away. But on the other side of it, whoa, I need to stop. look at that content, halt the desire to want to just automate it to go straight out to whatever social media platform, and think about it. And the same goes for, I was just talking to a whole bunch of lawyers recently, and they were having the same problem because they're thinking, okay, on one hand, we have clients that want us to use generative AI because they want to save money on discovery and how we can help them with their
Checking.
cases, and it's normally really expensive and all of that good stuff. But on the other hand, they were like, we have to then spend our man hours still overseeing the Gen AI. So it's not really a cost savings yet because we can't trust it yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just say, like, as much as that temptation is out there to want to just use Gen AI without checking it and just pushing it over and saying, here, deal with it, just don't. And definitely don't put confidential information in there yet.
Definitely not. Don't put anything out there. I think we've seen that earlier this year with Samsung, and just the guardrails don't fully exist yet. But we see, hopefully, got a good practices by companies to protect that. So,
Yeah.
Cortnie, I had so much fun talking to you, and I highly recommend everyone to go out Amazon. The link is on the
Woo!
comment section. Buy the book, What You Don't Know: AI's Unseen Influence on Your Life and How to Take Back Control. And Cortnie, I started reading your book, and I love how you explain all the AI concepts, what is supervised, unsupervised learning. It's like all these basic definitions that a layman person can really understand. And that's what we need today. There's so much hype, and everyone thinks everyone is an expert in AI, but most of us are not. And
Right.
so your book is written in with such clarity and such conciseness. I think anyone can really get a good grasp of these concepts and start asking the right questions inside their organization. And I think that's really the key here. We want to educate everyone, whether you're in data and AI or finance or marketing, ask the right questions on how your AI algorithms and your AI practices are being done today.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly why I wrote the book. That's exactly right. I wanted everybody to know you can get this stuff. It's super easy in its base concept. It gets a little more complicated in how it gets implemented and executed, but the base concepts, you can understand it. Anybody can understand it, and don't be scared of it, because we all got to come together and tackle these issues together as a society. And if half of us don't understand what we're up against and what these things are being used for and how our data gets into these systems and all that good stuff, you know then we're done for. So I'm hoping more people will read the book and really understand how it affects their job, their health, their kids, their politics. I mean, please, if nothing else, just read the kid chapter. I mean, make sure your kids don't fall into those traps that are set for them online. So,
Absolutely. Wise words, Cortnie, as always. You are the supreme AI thought leader and advisor here, and we should really take heed because, unlike other technologies, AI impacts and changes our lives, and we all need to be responsible. So,
yeah. Thanks for having me, Peggy. Appreciate it.
thanks, Courtney. So before I sign off, I just want to say coming up next month, again, continuing my theme on interviewing and talking to more AI book authors, I have the prolific and famous, I call him famous, Randy Bean. For those of you who don't know, he's written a book called Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data, and AI. So he's interviewed hundreds of corporate companies to talk and learn about how they built their programs, and certainly a lot of lessons learned there as well. So I'm excited to have Randy Bean join me next month, April 25th, also 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So with that said, Courtney, again, appreciate everything you shared with us today. Go buy her book, support it, listen to the chapters, and once you listen to the YouTube chapters, you're gonna want to have the book on hand and read the entire all the lessons there. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
All right.